Evangelism is dead in approximately 9 out of 10 churches in America. That is a problem, Dad, and we're going to talk about that today.
You know what we need, Sam?
The Great Commission.
We need evangelism in the 21st century. You remember that song?
Evangelism of the 21st Century. There's a song that you wrote called Evangelism of the 21st Century that was never recorded, never released, but that you sang to us as children to celebrate the launch of your first book, which was called Evangelism of the 21st Century.
In the 21st century. Yes, 1988.
It's Evangelism and God Gives a Plenty. Do I have that?
Evangelism and God Gives a Plenty.
Okay. Maybe you should release an evangelism album, and maybe that'll kickstart a movement.
I have written Mona Lisa Twins, and I have requested that they think about covering that song, Evangelism in the 21st Century.
I don't think they're going to do it.
Let's be optimistic about it. It is a serious topic, but I know that you want to talk about a very serious, good book by Frank Viola.
Yes. Tyndale has published Frank Viola's new book, 48 Laws of Spiritual Power. We're very grateful to them for sponsoring this episode, and we want our listeners to know about it. Written for anyone in church leadership, both vocational and lay leaders, 48 Laws of Spiritual Power is a fascinating look at what will increase spiritual power in your life and ministry. Best-selling author Frank Viola lays out the unchanging principles of tapping into God's power and releasing it to others. These 48 laws are based on over 30 years of ministry experience. We can say that it is trench-tested in Frank's life and the lives of others who have spent decades in ministry. These laws will equip you to look for God's power in your ministry and give you what you need for the ministry to thrive. So check the link in the show notes. Again, this is 48 Laws of Spiritual Power by Frank Viola. Thank you, Tyndale. Thank you, Frank Viola. And we hope our listeners will go check the book out.
Hey, let me just make this comment before we get into some of these 6 ways. I am incredibly encouraged that many of our community of church answers, and by the way, if you're not in the community of church answers, let me encourage you to do so. We'll put a link here. If you join our silver level, which is $9.97, you not only get into the community where you can ask a question 24/7, but you also get this brand new tool that is absolutely incredible called Know Your Budget. And you can use it again and again and again because it compares to other churches and you get an idea of how your church is doing. Very critical too during this time of recession. But I'm headed toward a recession, or I don't know. Are we in a recession? But anyway,
there's a group that determines the technical definition of a recession and when we're in it. It's a government group. We are not part of that group.
Okay. How about a high inflationary period? Can I say that?
I think that you are very safe saying that, and I don't think many people are going to argue you on that point.
So let me get back to my comment. So I'm watching the Church Answer Central, where the community gathers, asks questions. Where you and I are always in there. Lawless, Brad Wagner, and somebody starts asking a question about church facilities, and part of their reason for doing so is they want to remove any barriers to evangelism for the guest in church facilities. And I mean, I'm just getting kind of excited. Somebody's asking a question about church facilities and they're connecting it to evangelism. We're getting more and more people that are asking questions about evangelism. Of course, you know what I did.
You pointed them to Brown Church Development Group.
I pointed them to Brown Church Development Group because I knew that they know this type of stuff. And if they're going to be doing a realignment of their facilities for guests, for others, I wanted Brown on it. But I need to tell Amy, please put I mentioned Brown, so I know that she'll put it in the show notes. She's so good about doing all that. So we'll put Brown in the show notes. Let's talk about how we can make certain evangelism does not die in your church. And this is for pastors. This is for leaders. This is for family leaders. You got to make certain that evangelism is a priority in your own church. In your own life, Sam.
Yeah, the best way to make sure that evangelism does not die in your church is to do it.
Mm-hmm.
End of show. There we go.
It will not die if you are doing it in your church.
If you yourself are doing evangelism in your church, it's not going to die. I know that's terribly profound, but think about it. If you're upset about a lack of evangelism in your church, I can certainly understand and I can certainly relate. I have told my people who I love West Bradenton. I love my church. Incredible people of God. They don't do evangelism well. They've heard it from me. They know I love them, and I've got a healthy church. I've got a good church. But we are not healthy in the area of evangelism. And if that's you, which I'm assuming it's a lot of our listeners, a good way to make sure it doesn't die is just for you yourself to go do it. Then it won't die.
And if you are doing evangelism, you can continue to do evangelism in a more healthy fashion if you have someone to whom you're accountable. Your staff is accountable to one another, if I recall, Sam.
Yes, evangelism culture begins with the leadership. Obviously, because evangelism is prescribed in the New Testament, people are always going to do it. Like, you're always going to have somebody in your church. Many churches will have somebody that's going to do it, whether they're trained, equipped or not. They're just going to read the Bible and go, I need to go do this. But generally, you don't have a healthy culture of evangelism without accountability. And that begins at the top. Every staff meeting, every ministry team meeting that we have, which is weekly, most weeks, the very first item on the agenda is what is called gospel conversations. So we have a standing agenda where we have 3 or 4 or 5 things that we talk about every week. The very first thing that we talk about as a staff is, tell me about a gospel conversation you had this week. And not everyone shares every week, but goodness, if you go several weeks without saying something, well, we're going to know you're not doing the work of evangelism. So we expect somebody to speak up every week about, hey, here's how I shared the gospel. I had a conversation with a neighbor, or I had an opportunity to invite somebody to church. We call them gospel conversations, where you're either explicitly sharing the gospel or leading into a conversation where you can share the gospel. And it's been great for the culture of our team. It's been great for the culture of our church. This is not something that's overbearing. It's just, hey, let's celebrate the fact that somebody shared Christ with another person. And we have that accountability with our ministry team.
It was February 1980. Does that date ring a bell to you at all?
It rings a bell. I don't remember it.
Yeah. You were born, and shortly after, either you were about to be born, it was the Sunday before you were born, or it was March, and it was the Sunday after you were born, right shortly afterwards. For some reason, you coming into this world got me into the Bible.
I'm glad I've done something positive for you. So
I didn't know where to start, so I just opened up and started reading the book of Acts. I said, oh, this is about action. So I read the book of Acts and started talking about witnessing, and it started talking about sharing the gospel. So I went to my pastor. By the way, I had just been baptized. So I think it was January that I had been baptized. And I went to my pastor and I said, boy, I'm reading a lot in the book of Acts about people talking about Jesus. How do I do that? And he said, well, that's not what we do in our church. We're more of a discipleship church. And so we really don't do evangelism. He said, but hey, I got this in the mail as a free copy of a book called Evangelism Explosion. He said, you might want to read that. And so I learned how to share my faith from a pastor who didn't, who gave me a book by a Presbyterian when I was a Baptist.
Well, I'm glad it worked out some way, somehow for you. Yeah. A culture of anything doesn't happen without accountability.
Right.
Very rare for culture to form without accountability. If you want a culture of evangelism, you have to build accountability, and it doesn't have to be overbearing. It can be fun. It can be engaging. In our case, we're just telling stories of sharing our faith, and those stories encourage others. They're catalysts for others to go do the same.
Now I'm going to fast forward. 1996.
I do remember. This is a good year. Yeah, I learned to drive.
Oh, Lord. Look out mailboxes. Boy, I
I
remember.
did hit a few mailboxes in the wintertime sliding on ice
Oh gosh, all our neighbors. Hey, my name is Tom. I've come to replace your mailbox. Um,
again.
uh, anyway, it was 1996, and I had a student in the PhD program, the brightest student I'd ever had, and he had finished his dissertation, and I don't remember the specific title, but it was Prayer and Evangelism and Spiritual Warfare was the topic. Blew me away. Now, I'd been reading chapter by chapter. It's not like I had not read it to that point, but I read it in its totality. This guy by the name of Chuck Lawless presented this dissertation. And I said, this guy is going to be sending a message to the world about evangelism and how it is spiritual warfare. Think about what the enemy does not want you to do. The enemy does not want you to tell others how they can go to heaven and not go to hell. The enemy will do whatever he can in his power. So we have to realize that if we are doing evangelism, we are engaging the enemy because he will take us on full speed ahead and do everything he can to deter us. That's why prayer has to be intricately tied to evangelism. That's what Chuck Lawless has been preaching for years.
And he's really one of the best to listen to on this subject. Spiritual warfare is certainly a very real part of evangelism. And part of the ways that you counter that spiritual warfare is prayer. Hopefully you can, pray for the lost in your church and pray that you have opportunities. I love to encourage people to pray for opportunities and then have them report back. Say, okay, ask God to just give you opportunities, gospel opportunities, see what happens.
Right.
And then, come back to me in a couple, 3 weeks.
Exactly.
And inevitably people come back and, it's not even, I have new opportunities. It's, I am more aware of the opportunities that I have been missing. And I think prayer is a key part of that.
Well, we're not saying much about this right now because it won't be fully released until probably May of 2023, and we're releasing this podcast in November. But we will be releasing a new initiative called the Hope Initiative, and it's very simple. It's 30 days to move your church to a greater heart for the lost, and primarily through prayer. Well, we've been doing betas on this, beta tests, where we've been asking different churches and different groups to try it to see what happens. I got a text from a guy by the name of Steve Shifley just a few minutes ago. You know that name?
Yeah, he's one of our favorite Canadians.
Yeah. In fact,
one of the better dressed Canadians, by the way.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So he is doing a beta. He is in day 18 of it. And he says, Tom, I got to tell you this. It's lightning in a bottle. That's what it is. It's just lightning in a bottle. This is day 18, and he is already seeing his church transform through that. It's a very simple thing. It's uniting prayer and evangelism. It's praying for opportunities. It's praying for yourself. It's praying for your pastor. And it's a little bit of going too, but a very non-threatening type of going. That's not ready to be released. But the point about it is the church that is in evangelism needs to also be in prayer because they are intricately connected.
Yeah, and I'd say the only thing worse than you singing 60 songs is you trying to impersonate a Canadian accent.
So an Alabama boy living in Tennessee is trying to impersonate an Albertan.
I will applaud you for effort. I'll give you an A for effort.
That's right. You also have to provide the church with a simple evangelism tool. You should. I don't know what I think. I know that you have used 3 circles, but I use 3 circles.
Correct. And when I've done evangelism training at my church, and people say, "Well, how do I share the gospel?" 3 circles that was developed by Jimmy Scroggins. I believe it's in a book called Everyday Gospel, Turning Everyday Conversations into Gospel Conversations, or something like that.
It is. Just look up Jimmy Scroggins for that. But I use the app, and the app is Life on Mission. It is really good.
Yeah. Great tools, good things to place into the hands of your people. I find that, when you have something tangible, you tend to do it more. So talking to somebody in, just a very figurative sense, or, conceptual is the word I'm looking for, in a conceptual way is fine. But if you can give somebody a tool like an app on the phone, they're more inclined to actually use it and do the thing that you want them to do. Evangelism is no exception.
Do you know that I am so technologically advanced that I use 2 apps in my evangelism?
Oh, you're
I use 3 circles if I have the opportunity to go through it. I don't always use it. Sometimes I just get in conversations, but if I have the opportunity, the lady who cuts my hairs, I took her through 3 circles while she was clipping. I just showed it to her on my phone, but I don't always do that. But the app that I use that is another part of my evangelism is Echo Prayer. It's just called Echo, and it's just a prayer app, just simple as that. Write prayers down, but I always put number 1 on my prayer app, opportunity to share Christ. And it's a reminder
there
for
you
me
go.
to pray for opportunities. So I take my prayer app for the opportunities to use my evangelism app for the opportunities to share the gospel. Simple as that.
Yeah, simple tools. They can change everything for you.
I know you do this when you preach. You, in a number of ways, and I've heard your younger brother, the other pastor, do this too. Some way, somehow, the gospel is going to come out in your message. It may not be an explicit gospel presentation, but it is unusual for me to hear you, and I don't walk away saying, I know what it means to be a follower of Christ. You communicate that in different ways. And that's the point. Keep evangelism as a key element of your preaching.
I feel strongly about this, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I realize that what I'm about to say, some may not agree with me, and I'm okay with that. It's not a sermon, and it's not preaching unless the gospel is present.
Well, that's
So every time I preach a sermon, I am asking the question, how am I presenting the gospel? Where is Christ in this sermon? Can someone walk away and know that they need Jesus or more of Jesus? And if none of that is present, I don't think I may have spoken about spiritual matters. I may have taught things in the Bible, but I'm not preaching. Evangelism, I would say, it's not only a key element of your preaching. I agree with that statement that you have here. I would just say it's not preaching unless evangelism is present.
Well, the gospel starts in Genesis 1:1, and it goes all through the book of Revelation. So it also should be in our preaching as well.
Every verse points to Jesus somehow, some way.
Totally agree. Totally agree. We also suggest, this is not legalistic in any way, that you have 2 waves of evangelism a year. And if you're looking at the show notes, that means they're put in quotation marks. But what we're saying is at least 2 major emphases of evangelism a year. When we introduce the Hope Initiative, we will encourage churches to use that at least twice a year, if not 4 times a year. That keeps evangelism not only at the forefront verbally, it keeps evangelism as part of what they do, what the members do as a part of their life in the church. So you may not have a program called evangelism, but you can have some type of emphasis in evangelism. And we recommend twice a year so that at least they're being reminded that they're supposed to be sharing the gospel.
I think the word wave is a good word. We canceled all the evangelism programs 30, 40, 50 years ago. We just didn't replace them with anything. We've mentioned that many times on this show. So I like the idea of an emphasis or a wave or some way of keeping this idea at the forefront of people's minds that you need to be sharing the gospel. Certainly preach it. Preach the gospel and preach that your church needs to be sharing the gospel. That was the previous point. But then you need to equip people to actually do that work. And I like this idea of, having 2 waves a year or 2 emphases a year where, you're showing people here's how, and you're equipping them to actually do that work. We've done also, we call them neighbor bags, is what we do at West Bradenton. And 4 times a year, we're giving somebody we're handing out bags in our church, and they contain gifts connected to something. So at the time of this recording, this coming Sunday, we're handing out neighbor bags, and these bags have candy in them, and it's got all sorts of material in there about what our church is doing for Treat Street, which is what we do on Halloween. And
That's great.
the whole goal, which includes, by the way, QR codes and things like that, links to certain things that point to the gospel. The whole goal is that our people would go to their neighbors and invite them to Treat Street. Now, inviting somebody to church is not evangelism, but part of the wave of evangelism is this is something tangible we're putting in your hand on Sunday. You're going to take this with you because it's candy. Please don't leave it in the car while you're at lunch because it'll melt. And take it home, put it on your counter, and let it sit there so that it'll remind you to go to your neighbor. Like if you tell your people, just go to your neighbor, they're like, okay, yeah, I should do that. And then they'll never get around to it. But if you give them something that they can put in their hand that they're supposed to bring to their neighbor, now they're starting to do something. So that's one way that we do it. It's not the only way, obviously, but we have these waves. It's more than two. We do 3 or 4 or 5 a year where we're actually giving our people something to bring to their neighbor to prompt gospel conversations.
I like it. I'm going to add something, and Amy does not even have to put this in the show notes. In fact, I'm going to ask her not to put it in the show notes. I am going to, and if you are really listening to this podcast, listener, this will be a big test for me. To the first 10 people who write me, we'll go to this email address. I'm not going to even put it in the show notes. hope@churchanswers.com. hope@churchanswers.com. And you say that you heard about it on the podcast, I personally will email you a copy of Sharing the Gospel with Ease, my newest book that I just released, to the first 10. So Amy doesn't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. I will even place the order myself, or I may get a little help from Alana in the process to do that. I'm going to give away 10 copies of my book. We're not going to put it in the show notes. We're going to see who is listening. So this is released on November 1st, and I'm going to see the first 10 who write Hope at Church Answers and say, you heard it on the podcast. You want a free copy of my new hardback book, Sharing the Gospel with Ease. How does that work, Sam? Unplanned, totally.
It's the only way that you roll. So I'm not surprised at all.
Well, I want to roll with Logos or Logos. We pronounce it both ways because their team sometimes pronounces it any one of those two ways. We've developed a really good partnership with Logos, and in that we've come to appreciate their tools more. And you're using their tools, I know, Sam, more than ever, and just kind of hooked on Logos.
I have absolutely loved the resource that they put out there, particularly the search engine functionality within Logos. I used to default to Google. I know that's bad, but I used to default to Google just because it was so quick and speedy and crisp. But now Logos brings to you that speediness, that crispness that Google has. But it's such a better filter because Google just throws everything at you.
It is.
But Logos, it's quick, it's crisp now, and it only throws what you need at you. And it is such an incredible tool. I probably use that search feature more than anything else.
Well, according to a recent survey, 30% of evangelical churchgoers want more in-depth teaching. So if you want to go deeper into the Word, Logos is the Bible study software for you. Logos fuses powerful technology with biblical resources so you can access different Bibles, translations, search tools, commentaries, seminary-level courses, and even audiobooks are right there on your phone, your tablet, or your desktop. They have nearly 200,000 digital books from the world's top publishers. Now, more affordable than ever, even though it's more powerful than ever. Get started for just $49. Go to logos.com/churchanswers. So you got all kind of opportunities here. Free book from Thom to the first 10 of you. Get Logos starting at $49. You can see the link in the show notes, logos.com/churchanswers. And use this as a tool to get you more in the Word so that you can be more in sharing the Word and sharing the gospel with others. 6 ways to make certain evangelism does not die in your church. I hope this has been helpful. We'll continue to talk about a lot of things at Rainer on Leadership. We will continue always to talk about sharing Christ with others. We'll see you in the next episode.